The town of Silver Creek had seen many strange sights, gold rushes, shootouts, even the Great Flood of '72, but no one had ever seen an Antompine and had seen an Hansein flood of '72, but no one had ever seen an Sons Apache man ride through its main street on a white stallion dressed finer than any banker. His name was Talon Grayhawk, and for a time he was the richest man within 100 miles. He owned half the mines around the valley, a stretch of land so wide even the sheriff couldn't ride it in a day. Folks whispered about him, the Apache who struck gold and turned the tables on every man who once spat at his boots. But Talon didn't seem to care about their talk. His eyes were like the desert before dawn, quiet, endless, and unreadable. And that was the very thing that drew Clara Weston toward him. Clara was 30, the widowed daughter of a merchant who had seen more broken promises than sunsets. She'd been courted by gamblers, preachers, and cowhands who loved her beauty but never her silence. When Talon first walked into her father's store, his long black hair tied back, his coat dusted from the trail, and a gold pocket watch shining against his dark skin, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: respect. He didn't try to charm her or boast. He simply asked for a bag of flour and a new pair of riding gloves paid in gold coins and thanked her with a small nod. But that moment lingered in her mind like a song she couldn't stop hearing. Over the next few months, Talon returned often. Sometimes for supplies, sometimes for letters, and sometimes, Clara realized, for no reason at all. They began talking about his tribe, his dreams, her loneliness. He spoke little, but when he did, his words felt carved from truth. She found herself waiting by the store window just to catch a glimpse of his horse's white mane against the sunset. The town disapproved, of course. An Apache and a white woman, they'd whisper. That'll end in ruin. But Clara didn't care. When he finally asked her to marry him under the cottonwood tree by the river, she said yes before he finished the question. For a year they were happy. Their home sat on a hill overlooking Silver Creek, stone walls, redwood beams, and glass windows that caught the morning sun. He built it with his own hands. Every evening they sat on the porch together, her head against his shoulder, the air thick with sage and laughter. The people of Silver Creek slowly began to accept them, not out of kindness, but out of awe. Talon's wealth was power, and power had a way of silencing prejudice. Then came the fire. It started in the mines, a spark from a careless lamp, and by dawn, the richest vein of gold in the valley had turned into a pit of smoke and ash. 20 men died and the rest fled, swearing the place was cursed. Talon lost everything that night: his mines, his fortune, his standing. Even his horse limped from the smoke, coughing like a man. Within a week, the same people who once bowed their heads now crossed the street when they saw him. Whispers grew sharp again. He was never meant to be rich. The spirits took it back. Clara tried to stay strong. She told herself love was worth more than gold. But when their home grew cold, when the pantry emptied and debts rose, something in her began to shift. The woman who once smiled at the sunset now stared at the horizon with worry in her eyes. One evening, as Talon mended the fence, Clara walked out wearing her traveling coat. She didn't look at him. "I can't live like this, Talon," she said softly. "I thought love could feed me, but I was wrong." He looked at her, his hands rough and bleeding from the wire. "You'd leave me now, when I have nothing?" She swallowed hard. "Because you have nothing, and I need more than hope." The wind picked up her hair, scattering it like smoke. For a long moment, they just stared, two souls divided by pride, pain, and the cruel truth of survival. Then she turned and walked away, her boots crunching down the dirt path, never once looking back. Talon stood there as the sun sank behind the hills, the last light burning against the broken fence, a man who had everything, now holding nothing but the sound of her fading footsteps. Weeks turned into months, and Silver Creek forgot the name Talon Grayhawk. Once, he had been the man every merchant sought and every woman envied Clara for. Now he was just another shadow wandering the desert's edge, a man stripped of gold, pride, and the only heart that ever called him home. The big house he'd built on the hill stood empty, its windows broken by wind and time. Talon had sold everything that wasn't nailed down: furniture, horses, even the silver ring Clara left behind on the knit stand. The last thing he kept was her photograph, a small tintype image tucked inside his vest pocket. Every time he thought about burning it, he couldn't. He didn't hate her. He hated what he had become without her. By early winter, Talon found work mending fences on a cattle ranch 2 towns over. The pay was meager, the food worse, but it was honest work. He slept in the barn among the horses, his once powerful hands cracked and scarred. At night, he'd stare at the stars and whisper to the wind in his native tongue, words his ancestors might understand, even if no one else did. Sometimes he wondered if the spirits were punishing him, not for his greed, but for daring to cross 2 worlds that were never meant to touch. One night, a storm rolled in from the mountains, fierce and cold. The wind howled like wolves, and Talon fought to keep the barn doors shut. Amid the thunder, a lantern flickered outside. Through the rain, he saw a man on horseback, cloaked in black, his hat pulled low. The stranger dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud. "You Grayhawk?" the man asked, his voice deep and gravelly. Talon hesitated. "I was." The man smirked. "Heard you were rich once. Now you're just a hand. Life's got a sense of humor." Talon didn't answer. The stranger stepped closer, pulling something from his coat, a small leather pouch that clinked when he dropped it into Talon's palm. Inside were gold nuggets. "I got a job," the man said. "Dangerous one. Pays good. But I need someone who knows these lands, someone who ain't afraid of ghosts." Talon studied him through the lightning. "What kind of job?" "Digging. Not for gold. For something older." Talon frowned. "What's your name, stranger?" The man smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. "Name's Vance Cutter. Folks say I deal with what's buried and best left there." Before Talon could ask more, Vance turned and mounted his horse. "Meet me at Dead Horse Canyon by dawn. Bring a shovel." And then he was gone, swallowed by the storm. Talon didn't sleep that night. Something about the man's presence stirred the old instincts inside him, the part of him that listened to wind and earth and knew when something wasn't right. But poverty had a way of dulling fear. By dawn, he saddled up the only horse he had left, a tired brown mare, and rode out toward the canyon. Dead Horse Canyon was a place of silence and bones. Locals said it was once sacred ground to the Apache, where warriors were buried upright so their spirits could ride forever. But when Talon arrived, he found Vance waiting with 2 mules and a lantern. "You came," Vance said with a grin. "Good. Means you ain't scared of old stories." "What are we digging for?" Talon asked. Vance's eyes gleamed under the brim of his hat. "A chest. Buried over 60 years ago by soldiers who stole gold from both sides, Union and Confederate. Legend says it's still down there." Talon's jaw tightened. "And why me?" "Because your people know where things sleep," Vance said darkly. "And you need the money." He was right. Against his better judgment, Talon took the shovel. The 2 men began digging as the wind moaned through the canyon. Hours passed. The ground was hard, unyielding, until Talon's shovel struck wood. A dull, hollow sound. Vance's grin widened. "We found it." But as they pried the chest loose from the earth, Talon felt the air grow heavy. The wind stopped. Even the mules grew restless. When the lid creaked open, the gold inside gleamed, brighter than the morning sun. Yet beneath that shine, Talon felt something ancient watching him. "This gold," he whispered, "was buried for a reason." Vance ignored him, his hands shaking with greed. "Rich again, Grayhawk. Rich again." But Talon's gaze lingered on the canyon walls, where faint red markings, like warning symbols, glowed beneath the dust. Something had awakened. The wooden chest lay open like a wound in the earth, gold glimmering inside as if it had trapped the sunlight itself. But Talon Grayhawk felt no joy, no victory, only a cold weight pressing against his chest. "This gold," he murmured, staring into the flickering glow of the lantern, "it smells of death." Vance Cutter laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "Death don't smell like anything once you're rich. Now grab your share, Grayhawk. You've earned it." Talon's hands hovered over the coins. Each piece was carved with strange markings, symbols older than any he'd seen, twisted and burnt along the edges. The air felt heavier with every breath. The ground itself seemed to pulse faintly beneath his boots. "I know these marks," Talon whispered. "They're from an old Apache warning. My grandfather used to tell tales about soldiers who took gold from sacred land. Every man who touched it went mad. Or vanished." Vance snorted. "Your people love ghost stories." He scooped up a handful of coins, stuffing them into his saddlebag. "Ghosts don't pay for whiskey, Grayhawk. Gold does." But as the bag filled, the wind in the canyon shifted. The lantern flickered and went out, leaving only the dull glint of cursed metal. A voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered through the dark. It wasn't English. It was Apache, the language of Talon's ancestors, calling from somewhere deep in the stone. "Return what was taken?" Vance stiffened. What the hell was that? Before Talon could answer, the ground trembled. A crack split the earth beside the chest, and cold air burst upward like a scream. The mules bolted. The canyon echoed with 1,000 whispers that grew louder, angrier. Vance stumbled backward, his eyes wide. "Cover it! Cover it back!" Talon shouted. But Vance clutched the bag and ran. Talon tried to drag the chest shut, his muscles straining against the resistance of unseen hands. When it finally closed, silence fell again. The canyon went still, too still. Only one coin had fallen free, lying half buried in the sand. Talon picked it up, wrapped it in cloth, and tucked it into his vest. He didn't know why, but he couldn't leave it there. Something told him the story wasn't finished. By the time he returned to town, dawn had broken. His horse was exhausted, his clothes torn and muddy. He stopped outside the old well, washing the dirt from his face. When he looked up, he froze. Clara was there. She stood across the street, dressed in fine clothes again, satin gloves, a hat with a feather. She looked different, polished, colder. At her side was a tall man in a gray suit, Mr. Landon Pierce, the banker from Silver Creek. Their eyes met, just for a heartbeat. "Talon," she whispered. But the man beside her spoke first. "You know him?" Clara hesitated. "I did." Talon gave a small nod and walked past them without a word. He didn't look back. That night, he found himself in the saloon, sitting alone in a corner with a glass of whiskey he could barely afford. The piano was broken, and the air stank of sweat and smoke. He laid the wrapped coin on the table, staring at it as if it were alive. Then a voice came from behind him. "You brought something back that shouldn't be here." Talon turned. An old Apache woman stood there, wrapped in a red shawl. Her eyes were cloudy but piercing. "That gold belongs to the earth," she said. "And now the earth will take what it is owed." "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. "The curse wakes when greed touches what is sacred. The man you dug with, he will die before the next full moon. And you, Grayhawk, you carry its mark." She pointed to his chest. Beneath his skin, faint lines were forming, glowing patterns like the ones carved into the coins. "How do I stop it?" he demanded. The woman's voice trembled like the wind. "By returning what was taken, and by making peace with what you've lost." Before he could ask more, she vanished into the dark, leaving only the faint scent of sage. That night, Talon dreamed of Clara. She stood in their old house, the firelight soft on her face. She held the gold coin and whispered, "You can't escape what's buried." When he woke, the coin was gone. In its place lay a single white feather, the kind Clara used to wear in her hair. And in the distance, thunder rolled again over Silver Creek, as if the curse was coming for both of them. 3 days passed since Talon Grayhawk's haunting dream, but sleep still evaded him. Each night, he woke drenched in sweat, hearing whispers that seemed to crawl from the ground. During the day, he worked in silence, repairing fences no one cared to fix and drinking water that tasted of rust and dust. But something darker had begun to stir in Silver Creek. It started when a prospector stumbled into town, wild-eyed and raving, clutching a torn saddlebag full of strange gold coins. He shouted about a voice in the wind, about shadows moving through the canyons. Before nightfall, he was found dead in the alley behind the saloon, his skin marked with faint red lines like burning veins. The sheriff called it sickness. The old Apache woman called it justice. And Talon knew the truth. The curse was spreading. Meanwhile, Clara Weston lived in the Grand Pierce mansion on the North Hill, a far cry from the home she once shared with Talon, Mr. Landon Pierce. Her new husband was a banker with charm polished like silver and ambition sharper than a blade. He had given her everything she once thought she needed: fine dresses, servants, and a life without want. But every luxury felt hollow. Each time the wind blew from the south, carrying the scent of dust and sage, she thought of Talon, of his steady hands, of his quiet strength. She had left him to escape poverty, but peace had never followed her. One evening, while Landon was away on business, Clara found a small parcel waiting by the door. It was wrapped in coarse cloth, tied with a strip of leather. Inside was a gold coin, blackened along one edge, and a note written in shaky handwriting. "It's awake. Don't touch it. T.G." Clara's hands trembled. The coin's markings glowed faintly in the lamplight, the same markings she had seen once before, carved into Talon's old tools and ornaments from his tribe. She wrapped it in linen and hid it inside her dresser, but that night she dreamed of Talon standing in the desert, firelight in his eyes, calling her name across miles of dust. When she awoke, the coin was gone, replaced by a single white feather resting on her pillow. Back at the ranch, Talon rode hard toward Dead Horse Canyon once more. The nightmares had grown stronger. He could feel the curse crawling beneath his skin, burning like wildfire under his veins. The markings the old woman warned him about now stretched across his chest, faint but glowing when the moon rose. He found Vance Cutter's camp abandoned, the fire still smoldering. The ground was covered with strange footprints, some human, some not. Then he saw him. Vance lay near the canyon wall, his face pale as ash, his eyes wide open. His hands clutched the saddlebag of gold, but his skin was marked all over with red, glowing lines. Every coin had melted into the sand around him, smoking and hissing like they were alive. Talon knelt beside him. "I told you not to take it," he whispered. Vance's lips moved. His voice was barely a breath. "You can't. Bury sin." Then he went still. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and blood. Talon covered Vance's body with stones and whispered an old Apache prayer for the lost, though he wasn't sure if the spirits would forgive him, either. When he stood, something caught his eye. A single coin untouched by the fire, lying half buried near the canyon edge. It shimmered faintly, like it was waiting for him. He picked it up, wrapped it again in cloth, and tucked it close to his heart. But this time, he wasn't keeping it. He was taking it back to Clara. She was part of this now. The curse had crossed both their lives, and no gold, no husband, no mansion could keep her safe. By the time he reached Silver Creek, night had fallen. The streets were quiet, but the air felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. He rode up the hill to the Pierce mansion, his horse's hooves echoing on the stone path. When he knocked, the butler nearly fainted at the sight of him, a shirtless Apache man, hair wild, his skin faintly glowing with red markings under the moonlight. "I need to speak to Clara Weston," he said. A moment later, she appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale as snow. "Talon," she whispered. "What have you done?" He looked up at her, the wind tugging at his hair. "What we started together," he said softly, "we must end together." The sound of Talon's boots echoed through the marble hallway of the Pierce mansion. Servants whispered, unsure whether to run or bow. No Apache man had ever stood inside those white walls, and certainly not one whose body carried strange, glowing symbols that looked carved by fire. At the top of the stairs, Clara Weston stood frozen, her face pale and trembling. She hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years, and yet here he was, bare-chested, powerful, and haunted by something she couldn't name. "Talon," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." He looked up at her, eyes dark and tired. "The curse won't stop at me, Clara. You touched the gold too, that coin you hid. The spirits have found you." Her breath caught. "How do you know about that?" "I felt it," he said simply. "It's tied to both of us now." Before she could answer, Landon Pierce appeared behind her, adjusting his waistcoat with a scowl. "What is this savage doing in my home?" Talon's gaze hardened. "Your gold is poison, banker. You'd best burn what you have before it burns you." Pierce laughed, the kind of laugh that belonged to men who thought they owned the world. "You think I'm fool enough to destroy what can make us rich? Clara told me about your little legends. Superstition and desert smoke." He stepped closer, arrogance dripping from every word. "You had your chance, Grayhawk. You lost everything, the mine, the money, the woman. Don't come back begging for what's mine now." Talon didn't flinch. "You can keep her name." "I'm not here for that. I'm here to save her." Pierce smirked and turned to Clara. "He's mad. Look at him, shirtless, filthy, talking about spirits. Send him away before the neighbors see." But Clara couldn't move. She saw something in Talon's eyes, not madness, but truth. A terrible, burning truth. "Talon," she said softly, "what happens if the curse isn't stopped?" He hesitated. "It will take everything. Gold, land, life. Until nothing's left of Silver Creek but dust." Before Pierce could argue again, the mansion lights flickered. A cold wind blew through the hall, snuffing out the candles. Somewhere in the dark, glass shattered. Clara gasped as the gold-framed mirrors on the wall began to crack, one by one, spiderweb fractures spreading across their shiny surfaces. And then a low rumble shook the floor. The servant screamed. From the fireplace, ash and smoke rose upward, forming faint, flickering shapes, ghostly figures of soldiers and miners. Their faces were twisted in agony, their hands clutching invisible treasures. Talon stepped forward, his markings glowing brighter in the dark. "They've come for what's theirs." Pierce backed away, eyes wide with fear. What did they want from me?" Talon turned toward him slowly. "Justice." The gold coins on the mantel began to rattle, spinning in circles before bursting into flames. The ghostly figures surged toward them, screaming like the wind itself. Clara cried out, grabbing Talon's arm as he shielded her. Pierce tried to run, but the floorboards cracked beneath him, swallowing his feet into the earth. His screams echoed as smoke poured from his mouth, his eyes turning red like burning embers. Within seconds he was gone, pulled into the ground, leaving only the faint smell of sulfur and melted gold. The spirit's cries faded and silence fell once more. The air was thick with dust and fear. Clara fell to her knees, trembling. "He's gone. Talon, he's gone." Talon's expression was grim. The curse took what it was owed. But it's not finished. He looked around the ruined mansion, the broken glass, the smoking gold, the fear still trembling in the walls. It wants peace. It wants everything returned to where it began. Clara looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "Then we'll return it." He blinked, surprised. "We?" She nodded, her voice firm. "I left you when you had nothing. Maybe this is my chance to make it right." For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Two souls torn apart by pride, now bound together by something far greater. Talon finally nodded. "Then we ride at dawn." As the sun rose over Silver Creek, Clara stood beside Talon, no longer dressed in silk or lace but in a simple riding coat. Her fine jewelry was gone, replaced by a small turquoise necklace Talon once carved for her long ago. They mounted their horses in silence. The town watched from behind half-closed doors, whispering as the Apache and the banker's widow rode side by side into the red desert toward Dead Horse Canyon, where love, sin, and salvation waited buried beneath the sand. The desert wind cut across Dead Horse Canyon, whipping red dust into their faces as Talon Grayhawk and Clara Weston approached the ancient site. Talon's bare chest glistened with sweat and the faint, glowing tribal markings, while his long black hair trailed behind him like a banner. The turquoise and feathered jewelry he wore seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as if aware of the spirits waiting beneath the sand. Clara rode beside him, her hands gripping the reins of her horse. Gone were the silk dresses and fine gloves. She was dressed for survival, boots sinking into the soft canyon soil. Her eyes, however, betrayed a mixture of fear and determination. "We shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We have to," Talon replied, his tone low and steady. "The curse will not spare anyone else if we don't return the gold. Every coin, every ounce taken. It all must go back to where it belongs." The canyon stretched before them like a scar across the desert. Sunlight reflected off the jagged cliffs, casting sharp shadows that danced across the sand. Talon dismounted first, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He handed Clara a small shovel, one he had carved himself years ago from a piece of cedar. "This is where it all began," he said, pointing to a mound half buried in dirt. Strange red symbols glimmered faintly across the sand, marking the resting place of the cursed gold. "The soldiers buried it here. The spirits have been waiting ever since." Clara knelt, her fingers trembling as she dug into the mound. Each handful of sand seemed heavier than the last, as though the earth itself resisted their efforts. Talon knelt beside her, using his hands to clear the debris while muttering prayers in Apache, words meant to soothe the restless spirits. Hours passed, and the wind rose higher. A low hum filled the canyon, growing louder with every scoop of dirt. Shadows flickered across the walls, twisting into the shapes of soldiers and miners long dead, their faces twisted in silent agony. "The gold is near," Talon said, pointing to a darkened cavity beneath a cluster of rocks. He reached in first, feeling the familiar glint of metal beneath his fingers. Carefully, he pulled out the chest, its surface scarred with age and the marks of the spirit's wrath. Clara gasped as the weight of it struck her, not from its mass, but from the energy it radiated. The air grew colder, the canyon vibrating as if the earth itself exhaled. Place it here, Talon instructed, pointing to a shallow pit they had prepared together. It must be buried again. In respect. As they lowered the chest, a sudden wind roared through the canyon. Dust swirled into a cyclone around them. The ghostly figures appeared once more, rising from the ground in pale, twisting forms. Clara stumbled, but Talon caught her arm, steadying her. "Speak to them," he urged. "Tell them we return it willingly." Clara nodded, her voice trembling as she addressed the spirits. "We return what was taken. Forgive us. Forgive all who have wronged you." The figures hovered silently for a moment, their forms flickering like candlelight. Then, one by one, they began to fade, their faces softening. The red markings on Talon's chest dimmed, the glowing lines retreating into his skin. The wind died down, leaving only the soft rustle of sand. Talon exhaled deeply, brushing the sweat from his brow. "It's done," he whispered. "The curse is lifted." Clara smiled weakly, relief washing over her like rain after a long drought. "We did it," she said softly. Talon looked at her, eyes filled with unspoken emotion. "We did it together," he said, "and I owe you more than I can ever repay. I lost everything once, but I have you now. That's more than any gold could ever give me." For the first time in years, Clara felt the weight of her fear lift. The ache of leaving him, of chasing wealth instead of love, faded beneath the desert sun. She reached out and took his hand, their fingers intertwining, strong and warm. They stood together in silence, watching the canyon as if it held all the memories of their past, both the joy and the sorrow. The chest lay buried beneath the earth, the spirits finally at rest, and a new dawn crept over the horizon. The desert, once harsh and unforgiving, now felt like a place of renewal. Talon and Clara mounted their horses, riding side by side back toward Silver Creek, not as a man and a woman torn apart by wealth and loss, but as two souls reunited, stronger for what they had endured. The wind carried their laughter across the canyon, a sound that promised a future unbound by greed, fear, or regret. The ride back to Silver Creek was quiet, save for the soft clatter of hooves on dry earth. Talon Grayhawk's shirtless, muscular frame glistened with sweat under the rising sun, tribal jewelry catching golden light, his long black hair trailing behind like a banner of survival. Beside him, Clara Weston rode with a steadiness that spoke of courage and redemption, her eyes reflecting both relief and hope. The town looked unchanged, yet everything felt different. The streets that once whispered of gossip and judgment now seemed muted, as if waiting for something or someone to heal. The ruins of the Pierce mansion were still visible on the hill from a distance, smoke long faded, but the memory of greed and betrayal had already lost its hold on them. Talon guided Clara to the outskirts of town first, where the old homestead they once shared had stood. All that remained were charred beams and the faint outline of foundations, yet for Talon, it was enough. He dismounted and crouched, running his hands over the dust and dirt. "We can rebuild," Clara said softly, dismounting beside him. Her hands found his, warm and steady. "We've survived worse than fire, worse than poverty, worse than greed." Talon nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "I lost everything once, but I've learned something." He lifted his gaze to her. "Gold doesn't make a man. Love, courage, honor, that's what lasts." Clara's lips quivered, and for a moment, silence held them in a fragile embrace. Then, from the main street, a small crowd began to gather, neighbors, merchants, and townsfolk curious about the Apache man and the woman returning together. They stared, uncertain how to react. Some whispered of curses lifted, others of courage and loyalty unseen in their town before. Among them, old faces nodded subtly, acknowledging Talon not for the gold he once possessed, but for the man he had become. A child, no older than 10, stepped forward with wide eyes and held out a hand-carved turquoise pendant. "For you," he said shyly. "My mama says you saved the canyon." Talon bent, taking the gift with a small smile. "Thank you, little one. Keep it safe. And always remember to respect the land and its stories." Clara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "We've both changed," she said. I left when I shouldn't have. But now I want to stay. No gold, no mansion. Just us." Talon lifted her hand and kissed it gently. "And I'll stay too. Not for wealth. Not for pride. But for you. For us." The wind carried their words across Silver Creek, scattering dust like a blessing. Talon's tribal markings had faded completely. The curse of Dead Horse Canyon finally lifted. He flexed his fingers, feeling strength return not just to his body but to his spirit. Later that evening, Talon and Clara sat on a small rise overlooking the town, watching as the sun dipped behind the distant hills. Horses grazed nearby, the quiet of the desert stretching as far as the eye could see. "We have nothing," Clara said with a smile. "And yet I've never felt richer." Talon chuckled softly, his eyes following the trail of a hawk circling above. "Gold may come and go," he said, "but what we build together, that lasts forever." For the first time in years, both felt unshackled from the past. No longer haunted by lost wealth, betrayal, or regret, they had reclaimed something far more valuable: trust, love, and freedom. Over the next weeks, Talon and Clara rebuilt a small cabin on the outskirts of Silver Creek, simple but sturdy, crafted with their own hands. The townspeople watched, some in awe, some with curiosity, but all slowly began to respect the bond between the Apache warrior and the woman who had chosen love over fortune. At night, they sat by a fire outside their cabin, the desert stars above blazing like diamonds. Talon would tell stories of his ancestors, and Clara would listen, smiling, realizing that even the harshest desert winds could not extinguish the warmth between them. One evening, as a gentle breeze stirred the flames, Clara rested her head against Talon's chest. "We survived everything," she whispered. "Yes," he replied, brushing her hair from her face. "Everything. And now we can live." The desert stretched endlessly before them, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like home, a home they had earned together, built on love, courage, and redemption. And as the stars blinked softly over Silver Creek, the town that once whispered of riches now told a different story, the story of Talon Grayhawk, the Apache who lost everything but gained a heart worth more than gold, and Clara Weston, the woman who returned to love when it mattered most. Together, they watched the first dawn after the curse, and for the first time, the future felt wide open, full of promise and peace.